Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of AIGA Midwest Design Week. This is Speculative Characters for Visual Inflection as part of our second annual Midwest Design Week. My name is Sarah Mawhinney, and I volunteer as the events coordinator with AIGA Louisville, one of the 70-plus chapters of AIGA, the Professional Association for Design. This week, as I'm sure you all know by now, our focus on our theme is access to design. This would not have been possible without the support of our sponsors this year. Thank you to Saatchi and Saatchi X, the University of Arkansas Graphic Design Program, Creative On Call, Salesforce, Deckel and Moneypenny, and to all our sponsors. We are grateful for your support and honored that you have entrusted us to fulfill our goals for Midwest Design Week in a meaningful way. Now, I am so honored to introduce our next speaker. She might be one of the best people I know, and I've only virtually met her a handful of times, so I love her. I know you will too. Mia Cinelli is an assistant professor of art studio and digital design at the University of Kentucky. Her design practice encompasses an eclectic span of poetic and pragmatic products, installations, and graphics which have been exhibited nationally and internationally. Recently, her typographic works have been acknowledged with Best in Festival for New Work at Design TO 2020, a Graphis Silver Award for Typeface Design 2018, a Society of Typographic Arts STA 100 Award 2019, and a Communication Arts Typography Award 2020. With an inquiry-driven practice, she is passionate about and continually excited by the possibilities of visual communication and human-centered design. So take it away, Mia.
This is so wonderful, Sarah. Thank you for the incredibly kind introduction, and good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. I'm so excited to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. Can everybody see this okay? All right, awesome. Thank you again, Sarah, for that kind introduction. I'd like to go ahead and thank all of the members of AIGA, all of the chapters who worked really, really hard to organize this. It's really exciting to see this collaboration, see this come together. I'm thrilled to have been invited and really humbled to be among such a really great speaker lineup and workshop lineup. So thank you again. As was mentioned, my name is Mia Cinelli, and I'm an assistant professor of art studio and digital design at the University of Kentucky, where I teach in the School of Art and Visual Studies. And I feel the need, before I hop into this presentation, which I'm really excited to share with you, to talk just a tiny bit about my practice so you have some context as to where this work, this series that I'm going to talk about today, lives. So I am a multidisciplinary artist and designer. I'm trained as a graphic designer. I worked as a graphic designer. I teach graphic design, but my practice is a little bit strange because I generally find myself following my ideas around. And sometimes these are really practical, pragmatic things, identity design, posters, etc. And sometimes they're a bit more poetic. And so my work sometimes are soft sculptures or conceptual products or typographic installations or art shows. And all of these things are to say that I'm really interested in designing experiences. Meaningful experiences is my hope. And sometimes I'm interested in designing experiences that I've had that I think are salient and I want to share with other people. Sometimes I'm interested in designing for experiences that I think might be universal, but we don't yet have designed outcomes for. And sometimes I'm really interested in designing for experiences that we've yet to had and that are yet to have and that I think design can help us accomplish. With that, I'm really excited to share Speculative Characters for Visual Inflection with you today. This is a series that began a few years ago in kind of an unexpected way. After a long day of teaching type and talking about type and working on a typeface, I came home and I sat down on the couch next to my husband and I went, and he turned to me and he said, well, that was a heavy sigh. And normally that wouldn't have been like the most astute observation, but in that moment, something shifted for me because the word used to describe the weight of the sigh was also the same word I might use to describe the weight of a typeface, right? Like a heavy typeface. So then I started thinking like, what would a heavy sigh look like? typographically, or like even a semi-bold sigh for that matter, which then led to the next question, which was, why doesn't this exist? Typographically, why don't we have this as a character? That really struck me and really got me thinking, because in reality, when we speak to each other in person, when we can see each other, so much of our communication is nonverbal. The way we use physical gestures, hand gestures, the way we express things on our faces, all contribute to saying what it is we want to say. And what I think is really fascinating is that when we don't have these, when we don't have access to seeing these in, say, written communication, we find other ways to represent this, case in point, through emoticons. So emoticons, which first kind of appear in the 1980s, we all know are just recontextualized punctuation and letter forms that serve as representations of faces, right, or expressions. And so we know what this means. And these, of course, have informed what we know and love as emojis. And I have to be really clear in this presentation that I love emojis. I think that they're great. I think they're so much fun. I use them all the time. The heart eyes, the heart smiley face are all in my top used emojis. And while I think that these are really a great contribution to communication, there are some limitations to them. For instance, they don't work really well in a formal context. I can't really include this in a professional email. I can't include my many, many hearts in like a letter, like in a professional letter. I can't use, a big smiley face in a letter of recommendation. And so the question then is, how could these be more formal? How could that work? Because the other thing about emojis that I think is somewhat limiting is that often they're really, really literal. Of course, not always. And all of this brings me to typography and how we're visually communicating. And of course, for all designers, graphic designers, typographers joining us this morning, you already know this. But when we think about type and how it communicates, I love what I've been calling the visual inflection of typefaces, and how even the fact that this single word written in different ways says something really different. It has a really different tone of voice. And I love that I can do that. I love that we can do that. I think that's such a wonderful, meaningful thing that we can do in our written language. But moving beyond this, moving beyond visual inflection, something else I think is really intriguing is how we create inflection and social meaning with punctuation. Again, here's the same word, but with different punctuation. And we read each of these a little bit differently. We understand enthusiasm, we understand hesitation. And something that I think is really interesting is thanks with a period, how these things, like how we look at something and we all then understand what it is. Thanks with a period is like a really curt thanks. It's going, thanks. And we all understand that, right? Or we've all come to understand that. And that's just thanks with a full stop. And even with that slight change to punctuation or specific punctuation, it affords an entirely new meaning and tone. So this leads me to the big question, which is, what if we just had more options? What if we weren't limited by what currently exists? What if we can imagine something new? And so what if we had an expanded character set for both gesture and expression? And what would that even look like? Which leads me into the field of speculative design. Now, speculative design is just a subset of design, by which the point of it is to ask, what if? Speculative design asks the question as part of the practice. And we think about using design, as Matt Malpass would say, as a medium for inquiry. So much like design, or much like science fiction imagines a future, so might design fiction. And the thing about speculative design is it's typically reserved, or we think about it as being reserved for things like industrial design or architecture, because we think of those as being things that we can imagine a context of use for, or we can imagine ourselves interacting with. But of course, the reality is we interact with type all the time. It's an integral part of our society and our respective practices. And so there's no reason why we shouldn't have speculative typography. And in thinking about this led me to some things I didn't know about, which is that we've been thinking about this for a long time. I need to be really clear here. I am not the first person to be thinking about this. This goes back a long ways. People have always been trying to determine how we can adjust our language, how we might think about adding gesture and expression typographically or linguistically. And so there's a whole lot that predates this particular project. For instance, the manicule. I think this is just fantastic. The manicule is its own character, sometimes called an index, which is literally a gesture of pointing out hierarchy. So this is like a pointing finger, right? And this was drawn in like illuminated manuscripts sometime between the, I want to say 12th and 18th century. And so this is literally drawing in, someone drawing a finger of going, hey, look at this. This is important. You should pay attention. And this then develops into its own character. So something like the John Wilkes Booth wanted poster for the Lincoln assassination famously features on at least one of them a manicule pointing to say, hey, this is really important. And this still exists in typefaces today. You can still find this in the Unicode. You can still find the manicule and you're still able to type with it. And so this is a really early example of how people have been trying to integrate gesture into type. We might think of this example here, typographical art from March of 1881 from Puck magazine, a whole 100 years before emoticons really exist in the 1980s. And I really love this idea because it's proposing, what if we recontextualize printer's marks to make faces, to show how we really feel? And so here we have joy, melancholy, indifference, and astonishment. And so again, people have been thinking about this for a long time, like Ambrose Bierce in his essay for Brevity and Clarity from 1887, by which he proposes this really lovely jocular mark. So we recognize this as a parenthesis turned on its side, but this is so great because it resembles a smile, and this helps explain when something is supposed to be humorous or funny and works to create tone in a new way, so that it would be used, as he quoted, to be appended with the full stop to every jocular or ironical sentence. If we move into then the 20th century, we can see examples such as the interrobang. The interrobang, which was designed and proposed by Martin K. Spector, who was an advertising professional in 1962. So the interrobang, you might recognize, is simply a question mark and an exclamation point merged together, because we all use these in tandem anyway for rhetorical or incredulous questions. And so Martin K. Spector said, I think that we can just combine these into their own character because we all know what that means. And I have to say that I think that this was really brave to propose something new, to try something new, to say, hey, I think that there's a better way of proceeding. And so this never really got popular, right? It ended up on some keyboards or some typewriters, pardon me, but it never really took off. But I think that it set the stage for thinking about the fact that how we have been communicating before does not mean that that's how we're going to communicate forever. If we move into the 21st century, this example, courtesy of the sarcastic font movement, right, in 2004, is addressing the issue of sarcasm online. So we all know sarcasm does not translate well in email. It does not translate well in a letter. It does not translate well over text. So how do we address that? And the sarcastic font movement proposed a typeface called Arial Sarcastic, which instead of italicizing forward, italicizes backwards. And this was proposed as a way to say, this is the inflection of sarcasm. So when you want to be sarcastic in writing, use Arial Sarcastic. And this, of course, leads us to the work of Adam Stanway in 2014. And so here we can see this lineage. So in the happy mark on the left, we can see something that looks like Ambrose Bierce's jocular mark, this really happy kind of smile paired with an exclamation point to talk about happy, good news. And on the right, we have these sarcastices, which are special brackets to designate where and where there is not sarcastic tone happening. So again, clearly not the first person to be thinking about this. But of course, all of this leads me back to this heavy sigh and thinking about what we do when we don't have this. So of course we have emoticons, we have emojis, but we also work to include actions and gestures in other ways. So sometimes we'll include actions between asterisks or tone between like carets or brackets. And sometimes when we're writing something out, we just do it phonetically, like ugh or yuck. We'll just write this whole thing out. And I think that this serves as a kind of desire path, right? If we think about design, is that we're already doing this. We're already thinking about it. And I think that we can do it better. So the big question then is, what informs this work? How does anyone actually start developing new characters? How does that actually make sense? And so there were a lot of things that I wanted to consider while I was thinking about how to give new form to these characters to represent the things that I wanted them to. And I do have like a small aside here, which is to say that the research for these, the works themselves are all within a particular cultural context, right? Like I practice in the West, I live in the West, not all gestures are universal. And so I just want to be clear in the fact that these are not intended to be exhaustive or exclusive. But as I was designing, something that, of course, first and foremost came into play were physical gestures, the way in which we use our hands when we talk, the way in which certain things are lost when we don't have a physical gesture accompanying our language, like air quotes. This is something we do all the time. And when we don't have air quotes, we completely lose this. And then there's like the really awkward situation of having quotations in writing that don't actually belong. And we're not really sure if someone is being sarcastic. And so this kind of gesture, I think, was really important to consider. Or things like the really common thumbs up. We know that if you're across the room and you want to agree with someone, you're on the same page with someone, you're on Zoom with someone, right? You can say, yep, I'm with you, I agree with you. We understand the signifier of this particular gesture as a shorthand. And of course, we, in the age of Facebook and Instagram with the like, right, we understand what that is. Facial expressions. We know that you can communicate by just raising an eyebrow or making eyes at someone or saying like, is that really what you want to do, right? Like we can use our faces in a way that's really expressive and deeply important to how we say things. So that was important to consider. Another thing that was really influential to this project were the thoughts of social symbols and sound and shape. So social symbols are things that we have a social connection to, something like a heart as a stand-in for love or affection. But then thinking about the connection of sound and shape, I learned about something called the Buba-Kiki effect. Now, the Buba-Kiki effect has been done by researchers and repeated by researchers across time, across languages. And in each of these instances, they show participants these two shapes. And they say, which is Kiki and which is Buba. So think about it for just a second, because chances are something like 92 to 98% of you will come to this conclusion. And that's what they found and had repeated many, many times. And so what this shows us is that there's a non-arbitrary relationship between sound and shape, is how things look and how they sound is in fact connected. And so we can see here sharper shape, sharper sound, softer shape, softer sound. And so this was really important to consider about what kind of sound or emotion or feeling, harsh or sharp, that I was trying to represent and how that would look typographically. Something else was pace of speech was really important here. And we all know this as, typographers and graphic designers, but just in case you need a refresher, for those of you joining us from other disciplines, we can think about the specifics of hyphens, N dashes, and M dashes, which we all know have particular places. So something like a merry-go-round, this uses a hyphen, which is the smallest of the shortest of all of these, because we don't really need that much time for it, right? We just kind of gloss over it, and therefore that character doesn't need to be very large. But think about how this works in contrast to an N dash. And so an N dash, of course, we use for duration, so Thursday through Saturday. We need a little bit more time and a little bit more space to use the word through, and that character is a little bit longer. And when we get down to the M dash, denoting a change of thought, but wait, there's more, we need an even bigger gap. And so the way in which our punctuation is working is actually emulating or referencing the pace at which we read or speak. And so in considering these characters, the length of time that they take to speak or say was important in determining the width of that character. And even thinking about, could people be on board with this? Would people understand and be excited about characters that maybe are new and maybe the history isn't really obvious? And thinking about something like the ampersand made me feel a little bit more confident, because we know that an ampersand originated as a ligature for the Latin word and as et. And so some ampersands still take this form of like an E and a T, but over time it's developed into what we understand and know as the kind of contemporary ampersand. And people use this all the time without any knowledge of its history. So we can still assign new meanings to new forms, even in an abstract way. As I was designing, I also thought a lot about context and feasibility. Where does it live and how can it live there in a way that makes sense? And so as I was designing, I have just notebooks full of these scrawls and ideas to how to write these things out, because I didn't want it just to be something that would be typed, because we handwrite things all the time. And so how could these characters live among handwriting? How could they be unobtrusive to write among other existing characters? And so I didn't want things that were too complex and things that you didn't have to think of, oh wait, how do I actually draw that? Things that felt natural and instant and easy to remember. And of course, I was designing these characters to live within a typeface as well. Then the question was, what typeface do I design them to be a part of? And this is actually an unironic use of Helvetica. I still love Helvetica. Of course, as one of the most popular typefaces of the 20th century, it made sense to put it in something like this. So all these characters are designed in Helvetica to be somewhat ubiquitous and familiar. And last but not least, something that I really considered was iterating through. My first ideas were not my best ideas, as I'm sure is a shared experience. And so there was a lot of work and revision and printing and marking and putting things up on the wall and really trying to think through what these characters could look like and what didn't work and what made sense, and the many, many, many iterations. This is just a very small amount shown here to get from the first idea to something that was workable to something that worked really well. All of that being said, I'm really excited to introduce you to this expanded character set and how, of course, how they were developed and what they came to be. The first of these speculative characters, and maybe my favorite, is the effecticon. And the effecticon resembles the social symbol of a heart. It looks kind of like an ampersand. It also has this kind of gesture of a hug or togetherness. And this is representative of love and respect and affection. And we can use these in line with text. The shrug sign, as what I think is a near universal symbol of uncertainty. Everyone's been in a meeting, everyone's been in a class, and you have absolutely no idea what's going on. And you can turn to a friend or a colleague in a shrug and just say, yeah, I have no idea. There's the elaticon. The elaticon is the excited wiggle that you do when you've heard good news, when you're really thrilled for yourself or for someone else. And this is a way of expressing that kind of empathy, that kind of excitement, that kind of enthusiasm in a sentence. There is the disgust mark, which is kind of gross, right? Like it's kind of like a frown. It's a little bit sharp, but it's kind of dripping. It's kind of like a tongue. And this kind of short, squat character is the stand-in for a word like blah or ugh or yuck. There is the awkward pause, which is just a long comma. There's the frustration point, and this is frustrated in its urgency of both how it's written and how it kind of presents. And so it feels really urgent and angry and bristling. And this is, I think, a better replacement than using like 8 exclamation points, because I think it is important to be able to express frustration. I think that this may be a more elegant solution. There is the anticipation point. We also tend to use multiple exclamation points when we're really excited. But here, I think we could do the same thing with a kind of motion to express that emotion. And so here we have an M dash leading into an exclamation point. So this gives it kind of a runway. This gives it like a little bit of that movement. And so here you can have the excitement of 2 exclamation points without the typographic redundancy. Here we have, as a thumbs up, the agree mark as a way to showcase agreement, solidarity, friendship. There's the cringe mark, and this is short and sharp, and this is the feeling of embarrassment or pain. This is a wince or a cringe of embarrassment. There's the disinterest mark, and this is a scoff, this is an eye roll, this is any kind of dismissive gesture as a way to communicate to someone that you are completely and utterly over it. And then there are the snark marks. This is the gesture that we make when we are using air quotes. And so instead of misusing quotations, we can simply use snark marks as a way to say, this is when I'm saying something mockingly. Also, as I was designing and working on these characters, I became really interested in how much commas look like eyebrows. And so here we have word quotes and angry quotes and skeptical quotes. And we know how important eyebrows are to communication. And so I think that these add a certain amount of specificity so that you can say something or ask a question in a way that shows intrigue or concern or anger. And last but not least, we have the exasper icon, and this is the heavy sigh. So thinking about something like a crescendo or decrescendo or something like a warning, this really long character takes up the space of a heavy sigh. Now, of course, after these are designed, I started thinking about, how do I share these? How do these make sense for an audience that isn't me? I'm really excited about these. Is anyone else going to be excited about these? And so in working in the field of speculative design, it's important to consider context of use, because if you imagine the future but don't give any context as to what that future could look like, it tends to fall a little flat. And so I had the great opportunity in the summer of 2019 to share these works at the Lexington Art League at Loudon House in Lexington, Kentucky, where I live, in a small solo show. And this really gave me the opportunity to think about how to share these works with others, because this does live somewhere between art and design. And so these works were accompanied by small phrases like you've seen on screen today, and gave me a chance to think about how to introduce these to an audience who might have no knowledge about typography whatsoever. So I thought about how I could introduce these in some kind of real world examples. So for instance, what would it be like to write these in school or learn to write these in school? How could we teach children learning how to write these new characters that it feels really seamless? And a question that I anticipated, I was just waiting for it, was, well, wait a minute, like the keyboard is full. This isn't gonna work. And the answer is no, it isn't. There's still room. And so this was put out as a way to explain that, yeah, there are other ways that we could proceed here. There are perhaps places where this can be added. Maybe it's not that big of a leap to think about how these things could be included in our everyday lives and objects and things that we interact with every day. And then this also led me to thinking about what other typefaces could these exist within. And so we all recognize Helvetica, but what might these look like in something like a geometric sans serif like Futura? Or what might these characters look like in something like Baskerville? So that was a lot of fun to think through in terms of considering what the future could be. And the question that I get most often when I share these works and exhibit these works and talk about these works is, how can I get them? Where, like, how do I get them tomorrow? How do I get this on my phone for my email right now? Like, how do we make these real? And I have two answers to that question. The first answer to that question is, in the world of speculative design, things don't necessarily have to exist to have value. There are design solutions and ideas which have value just as ideas, as discursive design, as a way to say, hey, this is something that I think we should be considering, something we should be thinking about. And in that way, it has value, even if it isn't, say, mass produced or in mass use. It plants a seed of consideration. So that's the first answer. The second answer, I have to refer to a quote by Toni Morrison, the great author. If there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. And I think that that's incredibly inspiring and important, because if we want this to exist, we have to use it. Unicode, the Unicode Consortium, which works to decide what is assigned Unicode and then used, generally speaking, that doesn't happen unless something is in wide use. And so if we want it, if we collectively say, we think these are really cool, then we have to start using them in our everyday lives. When you write a letter, use the Effecticon. When you sign something off, maybe instead of 2 exclamation points, maybe use the anticipation point. Maybe these are small things that you can include in your everyday lives, and people can go, hey, that's cool. I think I want to use that too. And as a small plug, in the event that you're a typeface designer joining us today, these characters exist in a kind of PDF online, a sheet that explains maybe how they could be used in typefaces. If you're working on a typeface and you think these are cool, include them, because we can use open type features and contextual alternates, which simply is an if this, then this, right? If someone types the less than 3, which we're using as a heart, maybe we can sub that out for the Effecticon. And so if we're doing the shrug person, maybe if someone types that, maybe it can automatically shift to the shrug sign. So last summer, when I was working on a typeface, historic typeface called Mackinac 1895, based off historic handwriting from Mackinac Island, Michigan. I'm originally a Michigander, if there are any Michiganders in the audience. When I designed this historic script typeface, I thought, I'm going to include some of these, because why not? Maybe they'll be useful. Maybe someone will see them, and maybe no one will care. Maybe someone will use this typeface and go, what is that? But I think it's worth at least trying, because this all brings me back to the fact that language is important, and language influences our actions and our intent. A quote that I hold really near and dear by William McDonough and Michael Brungart from their book Cradle to Cradle on Sustainable Design is that design is a signal of intention. What we design and what we use and what we think about says a lot about our society and what we value. And I think perhaps now more than ever, How we speak to each other matters. How we talk to and about each other matters. And I think by introducing a new set of characters, we can make communication that is clearer and kinder and more empathetic and more accessible, and allow us to say what it is we really, really want to say. Because I think that that's really important. I think that that can be really useful, because the reality of all of this is that we're going to barrel into the future anyway. So I think we might as well start thinking about what it is we want that future to look like. Thanks, everybody.
Mia, that was so great. I love it every time. I'm so glad. I had questions on, I have more comments, I think, than questions at this point, because I feel like you addressed everything. But, you know, my first one was, how do we get these into, you know, our computers, right? How can we do that? And so I'm glad you addressed that. And is there a way, would you be willing to post these? Can we share them in Slack for people to start using? Or,
that's a great question. I don't have the actual like images Slack ready, but I think that that's a really great suggestion for the future. But on my website, there is that kind of PDF download. So if people wanted to design variations on their own, like I fully encourage it. Like if people are working on a typeface and they're like, yeah, I do want to put this in, go for it. Like, perfect. I think that's really exciting.
I think I have a comment from Lena, who you've met as well. And she wants to know, can I purchase these characters? My cubicle needs a facelift and I love your work. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand. And I know we have purchased, or Decal Moneypenny has, one or two, I think, to print and download. And Lena and I now share a wall. So I see I can envision our shared wall just filled with your speculative characters. So, but I know it is possible. Just reach out to you, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Okay. And then the other one, I had a question before I get to the rest of these questions. Sure. And everybody, if you have questions, drop them in either Slack or on YouTube, wherever you're watching, or if you're watching on YouTube, but wherever you want to put your comments, put them there so we can get them answered. But I noticed that sometimes you had like regular punctuation, like periods, but then you had your other characters. And what made you do both? What made you keep the period? And some cases you got rid of it. Like, why?
That's a really great question. So my thought was, and I have to put like a caveat with this, is that, so we all know in design is that in order to find out how something is actually used, we have to prototype it. We have to see how it is used and misused by others. And so right now, this is in my own kind of realm of going, I think this is how it would work. And so in presenting these, I thought about where I would use a similar emoji and what I would do with that in terms of existing punctuation. So if I were to put a period and then something after, like a period followed by a heart, that's how I thought about where an Helvetica would go. Or if I, someone texts me and says, hey, I just got a job, I might text back like 3 exclamation points followed by, oh my gosh, that's wonderful. Or you might do like the hands up emoji, like, oh, that's great. And so I thought, okay, well, the Helvetica has to precede that sentence in order for it to make sense. And in the original iterations of the quotes, the eyebrow quotes, I had them on separate ends of words, and then realized that they totally lacked proximity to be read as eyebrows because they have to be close together to be understood. And so I thought, okay, do they live at the beginning or at the end? And I chose to put them at the end near the question mark in hopes that that would give the right kind of inflection. But the real answer to this is I'm guessing. I don't entirely know. I would really, truly love to see how people use them in the world, because maybe people would use them similarly, but maybe there's a similar way that people use emojis in terms of where they're placed in punctuation. I don't really know. I mean, I think some of it is like there's unwritten like social rules as to where you put emojis in a sentence. Like it's not something that we learned in school, obviously. And so I don't know if that's just like a socially developed thing and what would happen with characters like this and where they might live. But that's a great question.
Thanks. All right. Nick says, I love the emotion and energy that these characters bring to the phrases. Mia, can you talk about the process and tools that you use to bring these to life?
Sure. A lot of it was drawing and thinking, and I carry a notebook with me everywhere, which I think is an essential kind of tool for all designers. and so when I thought about something, or I saw something, or I got a text from someone, I did ask people at the very beginning of this project, what are your most commonly used emojis? That for me was an important kind of question, and something I didn't include in this presentation because it wasn't a really it was a really informal kind of question, or to people that I knew. And that for me was really interesting about what people used most commonly. And people were expressing excitement and embarrassment and affection. Like there were a lot of variations on the heart. And again, for myself as well, we've all been in a pandemic, right, for a long time. And it's, you know, when people you can't travel to see, or you can't see them, and you're trying to express how you care about people. Like I've sent a lot of heart emojis, right? Because sometimes that's the only way that you can tell someone that you love them, you know, across the distance, and let someone know that you're thinking of them. And so that in some ways kind of reinforced the fact that people use emojis, they use them often, and that there's kind of room for this. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that was an extra little chunk that was important.
And speaking of like, are they appropriate at work? We use them all the time, but
I mean, like
you gotta work in the right place.
I think it's really interesting on that, because I do too, but there's like a certain level you need to be at with your colleagues, right? Like when you have a relationship that is formal but also informal, you know, there's a point where you can use, you know, like GIFs in your text messages, you can use, you know, emojis in your messages, but there's like a certain like formality there. And I found myself, if I want to communicate something, like I want to kind of bridge that gap, I'll use an emoticon, but not an emoji. Like that for me feels slightly more formal. And so if I'm writing an email to someone I don't know, but I really want to make sure that my tone isn't misread, I'll just go, yep, you know, thanks so much for getting back to me. No worries about the delay, you know, smiley face, so that they really, really know, but I'm using the punctuation instead of the actual image.
Right. I'm with you. I've been there. Yeah. Okay, Allie wants to know, did you enjoy creating the characters more or coming up with their names? Both are so creative.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you for saying that. I think I enjoyed creating the characters more, but once I made them, I thought, what do I call these? And so that was a fun way of thinking through and looking at other punctuation that we have and trying to determine what name would feel like it belonged and not something that felt too far out to not be believed.
Okay, another one. If people were to start with adopting just one of your speculative marks, which one do you think it would be? Which is the one you think we need the most?
Oh, just one? Ooh, that's a really hard question. I mean, I feel really attached to the Helvetica, because I think less than 3 as a heart is like the least elegant solution on the planet. Like it's so hobbled together, right? There's nothing good about that. And so I think the Helvetica, and I think we all need more love anyway. I think that that's a really important thing to communicate to one another. Beyond that, I think the shrug sign is really important, because there's not a really great way of expressing uncertainty. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. And I don't think there's anything wrong with expressing and acknowledging that there are things you don't know.
Love that. Okay. Doesn't look like we've gotten any more questions come in. I'll give everybody a few more minutes, but I'll give Emily and Amber, who are also on the call, a chance to hop on if they want to. No pressure if they have any questions, but now's your chance.
I always have questions, Sarah.
I know.
I will always jump in.
I can always come up here.
Yeah, I loved your talk. And I know nothing about linguistics except for that one class that I took in college and really liked. But it's funny to think that you have finally come up with a visual concept to consider how our language and our vernacular is constantly changing and evolving. And so it'd be really interesting to see if this could be some sort of like grassroots, open source, how do we communicate with these small speculative characters? I love it. Anyway, that wasn't my question. My question is, what is your next focus in terms of speculative designs? In other words, do you plan to expand on these speculative characters, or is there another concept that has interested you?
That is a really great question. So in terms of the speculative characters, I've been kind of hesitant to think through like, okay, what do I do? Like, what do I do next? Like, because I could keep going forever. I mean, really forever with these. Like, I think the fingers crossed is an emoji I use all the time, and that could be a really beautiful, easy character. Like, since I've released these and conversations that I've had with people and with observing the world, thinking about what other characters and gestures we could include. And so that's like been in the back of my head of going like, okay, maybe these are things that I could add at some point. I would love for, I would love for them to exist. So what I've done since releasing them is, made that kind of guide, again, included them in some typefaces. And I've been really incredibly fortunate to be asked to talk about them and to exhibit them. They just came back from a show in Utah that I was really excited about, because I think a joy of having made these characters is sharing them with others, because I can promote them all I want. And the reality is either people will say, yeah, we want these, or, and so I kind of hope that they catch on in that way. And so maybe it's more promoting in kind of a gentle way than maybe making new characters. But the biggest thing that I've currently been focusing on is I'm writing a book. That has been my really large academic and creative investigation. Is I'm currently writing a book on contextual meaning in typography. And so that has been an enormous project, enormous. I thought, I can write a book. Now that I'm writing a book, I'm going, I can write a book. I can write a book. And so I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And it's been a total joy to learn and connect with other artists as I've been writing it. And so, and to connect with other speculative typographers, because there are other people in the world doing this work, which is really, really exciting. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but that's been my biggest creative project right now.
It does answer it in the best way. And as you make more progress on your book, you should let us know so we could like plug it all the time.
I will. I absolutely will. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia.
Welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Emily, did you have any questions, or did you see any questions come in on Slack or YouTube?
I didn't see anything on Slack. Last chance if anybody wants to put anything there. I'm sure we've covered it with YouTube. But I was sort of curious, in terms of people maybe adopting these characters, is there somewhere unexpected, like a context that you would be excited to see them used in?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I guess I would really love to see them. I mean, I think for all designers in the audience, the most exciting thing on the planet is seeing your work in use, right? Is seeing like you've designed a logo and suddenly it's on a t-shirt, or you've designed an identity and there it is in use. And to see something that you've made being used and appreciated and functioning, I think is really a joyful experience. And so within a particular context, I'd love to see it in a book. I'd love to see it on a sign. I'd love to see it used in a banal way. Like, honestly, like I would be really excited to see it on a menu somewhere. Like, I think in any use, I think it could be really interesting because I think, again, they have the potential maybe to add just like a little bit extra something, a little bit more ability to empathize with each other and communicate with each other. And so seeing it anywhere would be exciting. Although on that note, I do have to say, I had these in a show in Vancouver just before the pandemic, and they had brought in a group of children. They did really great programming. This was at Seymour Art Gallery in North Vancouver, Canada. And they brought in a group of kids to talk about language and talk about punctuation and talk about writing. And they had asked the children to like think about these characters. And then when they kind of signed the guest book, they were like these beautiful, like the children had written out some of my characters. And it was really like a very humbling experience to see it in someone's hand other than my own, because I've been writing these. And so to see someone else write them out, I was just like, this is the most, I mean, it was a really humbling and exciting experience. And so there's a long answer to say, I'd be happy to see them anywhere.
I was just brainstorming with my coworker about like, I want t-shirts, I want a hat, she wants stickers. We'll put them on our business.
For it. I'm so for it.
Send over the artwork. We'll get it out there. I love it so much. So I'm happy.
Thank you.
Push it out however we can. Okay, I think this is our last call for questions. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds. I'm going to pull up my outro. I'm going to get ready to go. I don't see anything. Oh, nothing on Slack. Okay, then here we go. So Mia, of course, thank you so much. I'm always so happy to be anywhere with you virtually. One day it'll be in person. I can't wait. Thank you so much, everyone else, for joining us today. Before we leave, I want to give another shout out to our sponsors this year for Midwest Design Week. Again, any updates on event information throughout the week can be found on Slack. So please do sign up for our Slack and connect with your fellow creatives. Thank you all so much. And we will see you at our next event at noon Eastern, 11 Central. Thanks, everyone.